So let it be written, so let it be done. This is Tabletop Terrors, and today we want you to rethink your encounters. We're going to give you goals that aren't combat. Still probably going to be a lot of combat. We all love a good fight, but we're going to give you some tips on how to make it so that that doesn't become a slog that just becomes point weapon at monster, reduce hit points. The most successful way I've ever done this was by creating a magical portal or a device that needed to be disabled. And because the real danger, the big imminent threat is if this portal opens or if this gate closes forever, we get trapped. If this device, whether it's a bomb or whatever, goes off, that is super deadly dangerous. Then you put enemies, monsters, between the heroes and that goal. You put guards around the portal. You put, archers, whatever you want to do. The players now are thinking, and I'm telling you, I've seen this. I actually just ran a game on this channel a couple of weeks ago where we did this, that there is an urgency that becomes way different than just, okay, it's my turn. Which ones are still alive? There's okay, wait, what is the portal doing? Who's near the portal? Do I see any way to shut it off? And so in my opinion, the best way to do this is have these like 3 magical stones in 3 parts of the encounter. And as each one sort of activates, it shoots a beam to the other and to the other, so that it's also not just one thing that they can all gang rush and go pow, 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 pow. So the portal, the device, has a couple of different touch points, and then the party has to kind of split up throughout the encounter. Put some monsters over here at one, put some monsters over here at the other, put one over a pit, get creative with it. And then they have to problem solve. Another variation of this sort of like deadline-based encounter combat thing is if you make it so that there are multiple people in peril at once. We've seen this a lot in like superhero movies where it's like a whole bus full of people or a whole trainload of people are in danger. Take that idea, but then spread them out. So if a building is collapsing or on fire, the heroes now have to divide and conquer and save multiple people. The goal becomes, how many people are left to save? Oh, there's 8. Oh no. That can be more fun than just, again, okay, kill the monster. Now these gnolls are in the way, and this building is on fire, and the heroes have to basically get past the gnolls. But the gnolls are still trying to kill them and do their thing. So those are some simple ways, quickly, just put a time-based sort of other alternative thing that's happening that's a little more dangerous or pressing, and all of a sudden the combat gets way more interesting.
Yeah, so another way that I like to sort of work combats into basically other parts of the story so that you don't have to. I think it's a very common occurrence where you'll have the story that you're trying to tell, and then the party will get to a combat, and suddenly the story stops, the conversation stops, and the game just becomes a switch over to combat mode, And at that point, it's just like, oh, I rolled a hit. Maybe they'll still describe their attacks and do cool roleplay stuff within the combat, and that's great. But the sort of like momentum of the story events stops so that the combat can happen. So one, I think, easy way to keep that story momentum moving forward is to have the enemies of the players in the combat basically converse with the players while they're fighting them, rather than, I think most times you'll have the sort of like, oh, we need to capture them and get information out of them, or we need to get this thing from them. It'll kind of like divide, and basically where you'll get to them, you'll talk maybe for a little bit, you'll go do a combat, you'll kill them or knock them out, and then once they wake up, you'll like interrogate them or whatever. And that can be fine for like little grunt level enemies, but it can be a little anticlimactic for like the bigger opponents. So one fun way that you can do that is to kind of borrow from something that you see in a lot of movies, which is like, while the fight is happening, the villain is like monologuing their plan, or talking back and forth with the players about the ethics of their philosophy, or whatever it is. You can go a whole bunch of different ways with it. But that little bit can like add so much into the feeling of a combat to make it feel like you're still in the story. One of the party members, rolls to hit. They hit and do a little damage, and then the villain, instead of just saying, "Okay, now it's the villain's turn," he attacks back. The villain like jumps backwards and says, "It doesn't even matter if you defeat me. My plan is already so far in motion that it's too late for you to stop it." And then another player goes, and then they can respond and say, "No, we've already thwarted your other ally." That whatever it is. I'm not going to make an entire conversation up, in this moment, but those sorts of things can add a lot to the fight to make it feel like these are still people trying to accomplish their aims and justify their actions and like reach their goals. And that doesn't stop just because we suddenly flipped into battle mode. Like all those things are still happening. All those ideals that drive those people are still, part of them. And combat can be a great way to explore those things. We were talking off, before we started recording of like the famous Princess Bride, like sword duel, where it's like those people are fighting, but more than that, they're talking to each other. They're having a conversation back and forth, and it's just as much a battle of words as a battle of swords. And that's a great thing that you can just steal and put right in your games. You don't even have to make like a big mechanics thing out of it. You can just, at the end of every person's turn, someone says something, the conversation continues, and, keep that flow moving. And when you have basically things to discover during the combat, information you can get out of the other people, and things you can learn about them, even if you do end up killing them in that fight, it can be so much more of a rich experience, having gotten to experience it that way rather than just, all the comms shut off and we go into battle mode. So yeah, try that out. Try having the villains of the fight converse with the players during the battle itself, as people are taking their turns, cut away to continue the conversation, and see what cool story beats you can make happen, information and secrets you can unveil, cool character moments you can let happen, when people like have permission, as characters to like take the liberty to stop combat and do that and not feel like they're slowing down combat or breaking up the flow or whatever.
Yeah, and I had an idea while you were talking, too. I'm going to use in a game. I don't know which one yet, but the player's going to have to go and find information, just like you described, and the person who is giving the information will be like, yeah, but I'm bored. I'm bored, and no one can beat me. So if you can prove that you're a worthy opponent, I'll tell you. And basically every X points of damage, based on the player's level, I would have probably 5 or 6 things written out that I was going to say as this NPC, but only when the players dole out X amount of damage, or like actually do, and then, the player can, or the NPC can say something like, not bad. Okay. So kind of what you're saying, Jeff. And then maybe when they get down to quote unquote 5 hit points or 0, they'll be like, okay, you win. Like the point wasn't ever to kill them. The players can still do that. But the point was, I have this information, but you basically have to, it's like when your dad's like, yeah, you could stay up late, but you got to beat me in Axis and Allies. Actually Fortress of America, true story. But yeah,
it is just like that. Very relatable story, Tim.
In Pennsylvania, when you're 8 years old. Come on, we've all had that happen.
So I like to zoom out. You'll hear me say this all the time, or take a step back a lot of the time. And in D&D, to make the goals not be about combat, but to still have your players be able to have combat, something that I have tried to do is, when the goal isn't combat, to make the combat circumstantial. When GMs prep combat, a lot of the times they feel a sadness maybe if the combat doesn't happen because they have these cool ideas and stuff. But that shows sort of a fundamental design decision to make the combat happen. Sometimes that's okay, whatever. But I want to talk to you about what it looks like to make the combat in your RPG a little more circumstantial. So I'm going to give my players a quest to go find an artifact, right? The guy in the town gives them a quest. Maybe it starts that. Not important. They go to find the artifact. And while they're trekking through the jungle to find this old temple, they fight a tiger, right? They're ambushed by an animal that lives there. It's combat time. We fight. black and white, this tiger's going to kill you, whatever. They find a dead poacher and realize, okay, there are a lot of tigers around. So you get your combat, right? Regular old combat. Then they find the entrance to the temple and go through, but somebody gets their spot check and, oh, there's spiders, but you know, you might be able to sneak by them. But on the sort of entrance way past the door of this cave, there's a bunch of spider webs on the ceiling. And if you disturb them, they'll attack you. Maybe have a combat, but maybe you can sneak by, right? Then you have them fight an ooze, you know? So now they've bypassed a combat. They've killed. This story, so much is happening already. But the same thing on the other side could just be, okay, you fight a tiger. All right, now that you fight these spiders, now you fight the ooze. Now there's goblins. You know what I mean? Like, it's a little different, but by preparing it as the GM with the intention of it simply being there and the players reacting to it, it's circumstantial. I think that if that's not to the player's goal, they won't attack the spiders if they can help it. Maybe somebody has a fear of spiders and they're going for it, right? Now you have a story. Suddenly a story is happening. So that's what I like to do, is try and make the combat more circumstantial, because if the goal is not to kill the baddies, in this case it's to get in the cave, you know, past the spiders or whatever, they can avoid it if they want to, but sometimes a tiger jumps in you in the jungle, you know?
So those are some ways that you can make your encounters have goals other than just get the sword out, slash the villain. We are Tabletop Terrors, and if you like this sort of content, you know, it's all about fun. We love tabletop games and, of course, creativity. Then you might consider subscribing. We also have a Patreon. If you want to learn game design from us, or see the little chunks of content that we're designing, or have an avenue to ask us very specific questions and get like really detailed answers, you can check out our Patreon link below. But in the comments, put some of your ideas. How do you spice up combat and give goals that aren't just combat? What goals do you use, or what tricks do you use that work for you and your players? Let's wrap it up with a TabTerian Toast.
May you mend the first break.
May you kill the first snake.
May you conquer everything you undertake.
Didn't say nothing about the second snake, though. You could bypass that if you use James's rules. Sláinte. So the thing with D&D is that if it's a monster, the players are almost always going to try to kill it. And one of the simplest things that James taught me is, if you just come right out and say, this thing isn't hostile, it's okay to do that. As GM, sometimes we feel like we have to let everybody figure everything out. But, you know, as we've mentioned on this channel multiple times, sometimes it's also way better, most times, to just come right out and say, hey, this is a lizard person, but they seem pretty docile and they don't seem hostile at all. It's like, oh, okay, that's way different than pulling out the sword. So anyway, sometimes just saying, hey, you could probably bypass this combat if you don't disturb the spiders. Just telegraph it clearly and say exactly what you're thinking. It'll make everybody much happier.
The other thing is, you can never have a lizard man that's docile in the corner if your players attack everything because you don't tell them. You know, it's like, I only ever did that because I want to have monsters or creatures in my game that you don't attack, that are just there for set dressing. And you can't have that if everybody's chasing every spider off into the woods, you know?